So as you see on the slide, these fantastic folks have have helped us out and are sponsoring this amazing event. So please give them some love, snaps, kudos, and check out their booths at the top of the screen under sponsors to just give them some praise. Oh, you can't hear again? Is it dropping in and out? Because I may just skip all of this. All right. I'm going to fast forward because for some reason my internet is doing the thing that magicians do where it comes out of a hat and then goes back in. So we're just going to fast sending out the key takeaways and all of that afterwards. But let's hop right in, and I'm going to introduce this fantastic panel. We are really, really fortunate to have these awesome revenue ops leaders, and sorry, fantastic. Thank you. Sorry, I'm like reading and also talking. These awesome revenue ops leaders to speak about today's panel, which is the RevOps revolution from tactical to strategic. So I'm going to do a disappearing act. I'm going to hand it over to Will Foley, who's going to be our moderator, and he will take it away. Take your votes. Thank you for joining. All right, Will. Oh. Well, we can't hear you, or I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. The mute unmute worked for anyone else struggling today to be heard. Thank you so much, Janessa. Super excited to be here and be the host of today's panel. We got an amazing lineup, and I couldn't be more excited about the front row seat that I have for this conversation. I wanted to just kind of give a brief background about myself. I've been doing RevOps for about 8 years now. Created the department at Splash, helped the company grow from 1 million to 20 million, and doing something similar at Brazen, establishing RevOps and growing the team from scratch. So I'm really excited to be part of this panel, and I wanted to first introduce Shreya.
Hey everyone, really excited to be here. I head up sales strategy and operations at Front. I've been in the RevOps scene for over 8 years in a very direct way at Front, Intercom, and Twitter, and also actually worked with a lot of clients on sales strategy and effectiveness during my consulting days. And over the years, I've built and continue to build ops team from sort of the nascent stages to more mature ones, and in doing so, taking teams from being more tactical to strategic, which is our topic today. So really excited to talk to everyone today.
Awesome.
I'll pop it over to Sonia.
I actually don't see Sonia on here unless someone else does. So maybe we'll popcorn it over to Siva.
Hey everyone, super excited to be here. I'm Siva, the founder and CEO of Everstage. Everstage is a modern sales commission management platform, and as part of my role here at Everstage, happen to interact with tons of revenue operations leaders, help them, reduce their recurring commissions busy work in some sense, and then help them focus on the strategic work. Before Everstage, I was a RevOps head of RevOps at Freshworks, the now NASDAQ listed company. Saw the journey from over 30 million in ARR to over 200 million in ARR with the company, and was built the RevOps engine from scratch. So have tons of learnings of things to do, and more importantly, things not to do. So hope to share some of those and also learn from the wonderful panel here. So super excited.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Ping to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here. I'm Ping. I have over 15 years of experience in ops. I currently head up I'm currently the VP of Global Revenue Operations at Vuex, building on the foundation of what the team has already built. And prior to this, I was at Chainalysis in a very similar role and helped bring the company from about 3 million ARR, 30 employees, to one that's valued at over $8 billion and over 500 employees. And before that, I built Sales Ops. It was then Sales Ops that has now become RevOps from scratch at a company called Andela. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining me for this conversation. And, we're going to kick things right off with, I think, the number one question of RevOps, which is, how do you go from tactical to strategic? I think there's A lot of questions I receive from a lot of different RevOps professionals, and it usually is in some form or the other. How do you go from tactical to strategic? And so I wanted to first hand it off to Shreya to give us some of her thoughts about that.
Yeah, happy to do so, Will. As I think about my own RevOps experience, like as a job function itself, I think RevOps is actually a pretty young one, right? Like it's been around for 15 years or so, maybe. And in a lot of ways, it's still very much evolving, right? Like we're talking about RevOps. It was recently called Sales Ops. I also hear my FP&A team wanting to say RevOps. So just to say that it's a quickly evolving sort of like function. But really in the last, I would say like 10 years or so, it's changed from sort of the early days of being very synonymous and equivalent to like RevOps or Sales Ops is equal to hire your first Salesforce admin, right? And doing sort of like the build there, to becoming a much more strategic one, and one that honestly has earned like a very coveted position on the go-to-market leadership team. And I think a big part of this is due to a few sort of like evolving trends. One, I think, is the changing roles and demands of the CRO itself, right? Previously, a sales leader was someone who just focused it on the revenue side of the house, and someone who was like the numbers person. Yet this role has now evolved to being someone who really needs to understand the full life cycle of the customer. What is the connection sort of between product, marketing, sales, success, support, pricing and packaging, so on and so forth, right? So the demands of a CRO's role have actually really grown and evolved. Add to that, like this expanding sort of technology landscape in the sales and marketing functions. We're not operating with just like one or two core tools anymore. We get hit up with a billion tools in the sales and marketing function, and we are trying to scale the org ourselves, right? And then last but not least, the business processes are getting more complex. It's no longer just like a sales team. Most companies have sales, self-serve, a bridge between the self-serve and sales. You need to figure out PLG alongside sales-led growth, right? And so ultimately, I think a combination of these things has led to go-to-market function really needing to be much more strategic in all ways. You need better data insights to advise businesses, right? You need your teams becoming much more efficient through scale and business processes. You need enablement to be smarter. It needs to really be sort of an integrated process, and you're supporting more complex deals with your deal desk, et cetera. And I really think it's all of this coming together that's forced the function in actually a great way to become go from being tactical to strategic. And RevOps is at the intersection of all of these things, and is a key partner in crime to, I think, enable all of this. So I think, again, it's a combination of these things that's really forced us to move forward in this function from becoming very tactical to strategic. And there's several ways in which I think we can do so, which I think we'll get into in this discussion.
Awesome. There's so much to unpack right there. I think, you've laid out a great picture of how, the job of a revenue leader really has evolved to being really managing the full customer life cycle. You add in there the technology that has been really flooding the marketplace to solve the challenges of a modern buyer. And you have a need for the RevOps role, which is, something that's been amazing to be part of. Siva, I wanted to get your thoughts on it as well, because I know you mentioned in the pre-call about, how it all started with this tactical Salesforce admin. And then it's just kind of blown and blossomed really into so much more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Shreya really covered it well. So I think among the other things, I would say one of the contributors also has been the recurring revenue business model. What recurring revenue business model has forced companies is to look at the entire customer life cycle, right from how they come in to how they get onboarded to obviously how they are successful with you as a vendor or as a as a customer. So when you think of this from a customer's viewpoint, then the silos of marketing, sales, and customer success break, right? Because it's hard to say where marketing ends and where sales starts, and where sales ends and where customer success starts. It's a loop that needs to go across all of these functions. So, which is where, along with the tools, the process, and the data, having a very unified view of this entire piece becomes super important. And just from the fact of having these functions and leaders who are separate, marketing leader vis-a-vis sales leader, you have RevOps as this one single unifying function that has a singular view across all of these teams, and also is able to think, therefore at a macro level along with the CXO. So, which is why this role becomes super crucial for the company, and companies that have taken that view, have really been able to accelerate growth in some sense. So, I think this has really evolved in the last 5 years, I should say, and the potential of RevOps for a company to manage growth as well as efficiency on the GTM funnel side is just humongous. So there's a lot of ways, obviously, to think about moving from tactical to strategic, but I think these have been the contributing causes for us to look at RevOps in a more strategic way than just how it was looked at a decade back.
That's great. Siva, I really appreciate that. And one of the things that just came in from the audience is RevOps the new name for sales ops? And one of the things that I can honestly say is sales ops really doesn't interest me. RevOps interests me. And I remember I was the director of customer success, and I was like, how can I help our customers? And I started thinking about the holistic picture. It starts with, what is the first touch that they experience on the marketing journey? What is the next touch? What are those expectations that they're being set throughout the funnel? And then what makes them a happy customer? It's all of that. And that to me is RevOps. And that's why I get so much more excited about solving RevOps problems than a sales ops focused problem where it's very specific to new business opportunity management. How do I get the deal closed? And so I think it is very different, but I'll pause for this panel's hot take on the question.
Yeah, well, I'll jump in there. In fact, I want to be called go-to-market ops. I think RevOps is far too narrow. And honestly, at Front, if you ask, if I say I'm RevOps, my CFO will be like, wait, I have a revenue billing team and that does operations around that, and they're RevOps. So I've actually been going with go-to-market ops because I do think it covers end to end from the time that you're sort of like lead to acquisition to nurture, growth, expansion, retention, so on and so forth. And really the full sort of like life cycle of a customer, I think, is better contained in go-to-market ops. So that would be my hot take.
Yeah, if I could add a little bit to that too, I think it's important to also think about the buyer's journey, right? It's not so much the sales journey. To your point earlier, Will, it's the opportunity. How do you close win it? It's actually the whole way through from the very first time they have had interaction with your company, right? All the way through you become a customer, and then the service that we provide, and you continue on. It's the renewal.
I think RevOps is putting the customer back into the conversation. So that's why I get so excited about it.
Can I offer a controversial opinion on this, Will?
Absolutely.
So depending upon your organization and people and complexity of the sale, and often also because sales is the primary revenue driver, it takes a lot of a leader in a combined function to make sure the processes before the opportunity and the processes after the opportunity, right? It's whether it's the marketing portion of it or whether the customer success portion of it, ops portion of it, get the same amount of attention, resources as the sales ops function. So where I'm going with this is RevOps is sales ops because I'm saying this with all earnestness, because sales has the loudest voice and can have the loudest voice. They are the people who speak the most in the company. So if you want your RevOps to be equally focused on both parts of the journey other than sales, it requires a lot of commitment from the leadership team to make sure the other parts are resourced adequately, or their voices are heard adequately, or their tool stacks or data processes are at the same level of maturity as sales ops.
Yeah, I think you've nailed the, I think, evolution, what I see as kind of different RevOps functions through the size of a company. Because I have observed and do think that as you grow bigger, you do have specialization. And I think there's this sweet spot where actually, starting off as a company, brand new startup, you have all of your revenue is new sales. I remember a tipping point where we actually had more revenue in our renewal pool than our new business side of the equation. I said, wait a minute, why are we listening to the loudest people in the room? We have more money over here in our customers. And I quickly started to reprioritize based on that change in the evolution of RevOps through a growing company. So I think it depends on the strategy and the focus of that business, changes the focus of operations. So, tactical, strategic, how do you do that? Planning from tactical RevOps to more strategic RevOps really takes involving key stakeholders and managing those key stakeholders, as well as the data and the process, the orgs and the structures. And I'm curious to get, Shreya, your opinions on how you think about planning from tactical items to more strategic items within your workflow.
Yeah, so at Front and in past lives, I think the way we manage this is through very clear road mapping. And with how I do road mapping, I tend to first, come up with like the 4 or 5 big themes, right, for the year. And often, to be honest, in the go-to-market ops world, as we shall now call it, these themes tend to hold for a longer period of time, which I think is part of being strategic, right? Your themes like typically shouldn't be changing really every 12 months. So as an example, one of the big key areas of focus at Front is moving up market. And so a big theme under which my go-to-market ops projects fall in is upmarket momentum and driving upmarket momentum, right? And then similarly, I have like, maybe a reporting fundamentals theme, right? Like depending on how nascent or mature that we are. And so I thematically have like 5 large buckets under which a series of different projects will fall under. And these projects tend to be much more strategic in nature, things that are going to drive more like step changes to our business, right? And then subsequently, I also maintain a separate sort of like list of things, which I call maintain the biz or maintain the business items, right? These are your classic, like I need to do forecasting every week. We need to build named account lists every, half or however, frequently is your refresh period. We need to be setting quotas at a certain period of time, so on and so forth, right? And maintaining these 2 lists and presenting it as such to leaders, I think has been really important, so that they're really aware of like, hey, what are like the big rocks that we're trying to move, and thematically, what are they and how are they aligning to the company's strategy and our business goals, as well as awareness of the tactical things, because those things take time too. And I think that's really, really important to emphasize with your senior leaders, because a lot of times they're just thinking about the big rocks, not the pebbles and the sand or the stone. And yet it's important for them to have visibility into that, because that takes up time and that needs to be taken into account as you sort of think about resourcing for your team. So again, like I think, in planning for both, and I feel passionately that you need both, you need to sort of like roadmap it as such to have your big rocks. And then, I sort of recommend having a maintain the biz, or like whatever you want to call it, set of like tactical items and providing visibility to your senior leaders on both.
That, I think, makes a lot of sense to me, Shreya. I'm curious, how do you set those thematic themes? What does that look like within your organization?
Yeah, so I think there's like 1 or 2 that tend to be very closely aligned with the overarching company strategy, right? So for instance, I talked about, the upmarket momentum being a big one for us at Front that I know is going to be an 18 to 24 month, like, maybe even 36 month strategy. And so that's a big bucket. And a wide variety of RevOps projects can actually fall into it. As an example, we instituted Command of the Message as our new sales methodology last year. And that to me is at its core about moving up market. So that is like a project that would fit under that theme, if you will. And then there's a couple of themes that I think are fairly consistent, but the nature of the projects might change, right? So I have a theme around reporting fundamentals, I have a theme around, scaling the org, right? So in reporting fundamentals, again, depending on what the maturity of your org is, it could be as simple as like, we need to set up like the data infrastructure end of story period to, hey, we're kind of like maturing and moving into introducing predictive like scoring for customer health or forecasting, so on and so forth, right? And so thematically, it still fits under like, reporting fundamentals, but the nature of the project might change as depending on, what your needs are as a business for the moment. Or in the sort of like building for scale bucket, it's all about, how do we drive efficiency either through process or technology and tools, and which again, the need might change at any given point in time. But that's where we also have a holistic sort of road mapping process where we take sort of input from top down from leaders, managers, and then I do roundtables with like ICs to get sort of like their input as well. Although I will admit that a lot of times ICs are so focused on the day-to-day and the tactics that they tend to end up becoming more tactical and fit in that tactical tactics bucket, if you will.
That's amazing. And, one of the themes that we talked about in the pre-meeting, Sonia, you brought this up, is how important leadership buy-in is when you talk about setting those strategic themes. And so I'm curious to get your take on how you get that stakeholder buy-in.
Great point, Will. So as we were talking earlier, sales ops or RevOps or go-to-market ops, I go with go-to-market ops. I like what Shreya proposed. So in go-to-market ops, you are driving a group of people to a journey without being their direct managers, right? So it's important when you're setting priorities, it's important that your sales leadership team is bought in, that your customer success leadership team is bought in, and that you agree on your key things that they want to go together. I want to tell you a personal story on this journey and how I did this. And to your point on the org structure, it actually fits really well, right?
I'm on the edge of my seat for Sonia to finish that statement. So while the audio comes back, Siva, I was going to bring it to you because you were talking about executive sponsors as well as getting the seat at the table. I'm curious how you really think about putting, you heard it first, go-to-market operations at the seat of the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things with go-to-market ops or whatever you want to call it, essentially, it all starts tactical in an early stage organization, right? When you are coming into a very small company which is fast growing, you want to first fix the things that are broken. So it does, become, which fire to fight to start off. But as you move along, as the company grows, and you see the opportunity for the potential for this ops function to be strategic, one of the key things that I have seen in my experience, as well as some of the folks that I've been fortunate to interact with in the ops function, is data and insights tend to be one of the key themes that help move a RevOps person to be more strategic and get that seat at the table. Because what happens is, you obviously, as the ops team, become the custodian of data that's flowing in across multiple tools, and also with the nature of how companies grow, no single person or leader has the time to also understand the specifics of the data and take out insights. So as an ops function and as an ops leader, if you're able to drive insights from the data and present it to the stakeholders, that's a very quick way to move to the seat of the table, because you have something that others don't, and they start to value you, and the conversation becomes much more different. And while executive buy-in is one thing, you also have to demonstrate why there's an executive buy-in to the other stakeholders. To Sonia's point, you don't manage any of these teams, right? So you need to know, make the other functions feel, yes, we need ops on the table to have them contribute and share their insights, because that's valuable for the company and for each of the specific functions. So, insights and data is a crucial element that I see that helps you get the seat at the table in this. And having said that, the other thing is once you have those insights and there's agreement on some initiatives to be taken, like what Shreya mentioned, you need to then be the key accountable person driving those initiatives to closure, right? Like so, because again, some of these initiatives tend to be cross-functional. So owning that initiative and driving it to closure becomes much more important, because now then you not only are the person providing insights, so you're not just a data or business analyst, but you are able to drive a certain behavior, or for that matter a certain result. And so again, it further elevates you within the organization. To be able to do those, it is important though the team is set up that way. I think that's the other important theme, because you need to have folks who are able to put on the strategic hat, who are able to think, zoom out and think in such a way, while at the same time not, shy away from rolling up their sleeves and actually getting into the, thick of things, because that's the nature of the ops role, right? I think I say this a lot. Ops is the function that never gets into the limelight when things are going well. Only when things are broken, ops comes into the limelight in some sense. So it's super important to be able to be comfortable working in the weeds, but also, having people who are able to then also switch to the strategic hat is super important. So setting a team in such a way becomes crucial for you to move from practical to strategic.
That I think is so aligned with my beliefs. And one of the things that I really work with my team to do is create a space to think strategically. There is no doubt that they are handling a lot of tactical areas, but every month we are going through a plan and a review so that they can take time to think about, what did I do? Was it successful? What should I do based on what I learned through this process over the last month or 30 days, so that I can help what I would call teaching people how to fish, which is, Ping, something that you brought up in your pre-meeting discussion, is how you like to do that with your go-to-market team. So I'm curious to hear more about how you teach people to fish.
Yeah, it's too easy, I think, to default ops to technical tasks, because more often than not, we don't have a quota. And, the expectation from others would be that, hey, you're ops, right? The title is ops. You do the back-end admin stuff. But I think it really behooves everyone to always be strategic at all levels of the company's growth. So, I mean, for example, at the very early stage, I know, Siva, you mentioned data. For sure, data always, you need data to basically, ideally, you have the data to back up your suggestion and your strategic plans, right? But at an early stage, typically, there isn't all that much historical data, if anything. Is there a way to be strategic? Yeah, absolutely. It's, understanding the TAM, some kind of pricing, right? Providing guidance on pricing, and trying to kind of see what sticks. And to what you were saying earlier, Will, on teaching people how to fish, right? I think, Shreya, you mentioned very early on, we tend to be defaulted to like the Salesforce admins and, hey, ops, can you pull a report for me? Rather than just doing that, show them how to do it. That enablement comes into it as well, right? To a certain extent. And again, from the system side too, at the early stage, yes, it will mostly be tactical. But then ideally, as you're building, adding more and more tech stacks, Will, you mentioned that early on too, it's vital to be strategic and really thoughtful about how you're adding on, these extra pieces, so to speak. That, what I find useful is to actually build a flowchart. Salesforce is the CRM that I'm familiar with. So Salesforce is at the central, and see how everything else may or may not be connected to each other. If they're not, we might have an issue. And making sure that all the automation makes sense, and it's nimble and simple enough that if you need to update something, it's not too tricky. At the early stage, I think we should also take a lot of notes in terms of what kind of talk tracks resonate with prospects, and then start building up playbooks that way. That helps enable future reps. That's also like the teaching them how to fish part, right? As the company grows, it's important to look at the data, continue to look at the data, to what Siva, you were saying earlier. However, I do want to say, the data doesn't necessarily tell you everything, right? Sometimes it's what's not the obvious, it's not really staring at you in the face. It's the anecdotal stuff that's also important. The strategic planning on the tools. So we're not stuck with the redundancies, and not to mention all the money that we might be spending on all the tools.
Yeah, and Ping, I would plus one to what you said by also adding that there's an element of this that's, within the ecosystem of go-to-market. And then there's a big part of this which is how can you be strategic partners with other cross-functional partners, AKA finance, your IT business systems teams, et cetera, right? As an example, we are embarking on a journey here at Front that's revamping our entire quote to cash process. And to be strategic, it's not enough that you just look at what happens within Salesforce. And once you close in an opportunity, hey, that's sort of like the end of my world. And rather kind of like working very closely with the likes of, in our case, we have to work with our engineering team, our CFO org, et cetera, and to sort of like even guide their thinking around how are we building this overall sort of like go-to-market, or rather quote to cash systems architecture. And while, my team certainly doesn't know all the technical ins and outs of the other sort of connection points, being a business stakeholder to them as well as we architect, for the company and at scale. And I think that's actually really crucial in sort of moving from the tactics to strategic, is thinking of strategic beyond just, go to market as well.
There is no doubt RevOps is this crazy cross-collaborative team that does so many different things, which poses a real big question, which is, where does RevOps report to in an organization, and what does RevOps own? And so I know from my personal take, I'm a big believer with aligning with the CRO. Who owns the go-to-market strategy? That is, I think, a key to organizationally setting up RevOps for success. And personally, I think RevOps owns really the tools, the processes, and the enablement functions, as well as the data and analytics of the go-to-market function. So that's how I've organized my team. But Ping, I know you had some opinions on also reporting to CRO, and wanted to get your take and then open it up to the other panelists.
Yeah, I think Siva or all of us mentioned at some point, it's important to have a seat at the table, right? Making sure that the leadership team knows, and not just knows, believes in the value of RevOps as well, right? So if there is a CRO, I strongly believe that RevOps should be a direct report into the CRO, right alongside the sales leaders, probably the customer success leaders, whether or not, the marketing leaders, depending probably whether there's a CMO or not, right? And then setting the expectations up front that RevOps isn't just backend support, right? We do more than that, I think all of us have covered at some point. You're providing the insights and the data and, the project plans and the enablement to the teams. And even though we don't necessarily have a quota over our head, the company's recurring revenue, predictable recurring revenue, is our North Star, ultimately, right? And if possible, we should be owning right alongside with the CRO, working closely with the finance team and the CFO, owning the budgeting and the capacity planning and the incentive planning and forecasting and all of that. I think showing the value through all of these actions should give us a seat at the table.
Absolutely. And it doesn't always happen.
No.
But that's okay. That's why we're here, learning from each other to figure out how we can help other people get a seat to the table. And one of the tools that I know I've used, and one of the panelists has asked about a charter to educate the team. And I've used that from day one. What is RevOps? I know it means a lot of different things from a lot of different organizations. And I think it's really important to set what that charter means for your organization. And so it's a tool I've used consistently and keep revisiting to make sure that the whole organization understands this is RevOps. And it's no fault of anybody. It's a growing organization. People come in and out and people forget, and that's okay. By having this charter, it creates this documented source of truth. This is what RevOps is, and I strongly believe in a charter for RevOps, but I'll pause and see if there's any other hot takes from the panelists.
I think I'd agree with that, Will. The one thing I might add is, as a go-to-market ops team, being open to changes to your org as the company grows. As an example, when we were at Intercom, under go-to-market ops, we had our business systems team, which at that point in time had your sort of classical like BSA roles, PM roles, but we also had developers on the team. At some point, the company matured enough where we were building out a more centralized IT business team that it made sense to consolidate all development resources under, and that we sort of like use as a pooled resourcing model, right? And so I think it's really important, and I'm 100% aligned with you on having that charter. But to your point about revisit it with your stakeholders, but maybe also revisit it internally to pressure test if that model is working for you at that point in time in the life sort of stage of the business that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that point that Shreya mentioned, because a very similar situation that we had at Freshworks as well previously, where, as the organization developed, we had to pull in the ID as a separate team. Obviously, the scope became much more larger than what it could be handled at RevOps, and RevOps became one of the kind of the stakeholders for the ID team. So and so that's one. There's obviously a lot of other things that also just get pulled into the finance organization as well from RevOps. So things keep changing. So it's important to have like a mindset of moving along with what's the requirement of the company at that point and at the stage at which it is, and think about it that way. And I think one other point that I'd add on the tactical versus strategic is also how companies think about the cost of the ops function, right? And also, if I were to take the finance parlance, is ops considered as a cost item on G&A, like general and administration costs, or is it S&M costs? Is it part of the sales and marketing team and critical to the growth of the company? So that gives you an indication of what the leadership thinks. And I think if that's in G&A, then that's probably the first thing that we should probably even change, because it starts right from there.
And you know what? I know there's many ways to interpret numbers. And so I'm sure there's strategic reasons why you would put it in one budget versus the other budget. And we don't have enough time to debate that by any means. All right. So hot take question. I can probably guess that we all get asked really, really tactical questions in very loud ways. And our key stakeholders will come because they believe it's the most important thing. And it really is something that is reality. I deal with it all the time. I have, this tactical item I need to do right now. And I'm curious to get this group's thoughts on how do you handle those situations. It's highly emotional for those key stakeholders to come to you and they have a real problem. How do you address that when you have this beautiful plan of strategic initiatives that may be at risk if you do it? So Shreya, I'm curious to get your opinion and then open it up.
Yeah, it's funny you asked me this question because I was just onboarding a new leader onto my team right before this call, and we were talking about our roadmap, and I said, hey, about, 30 to 40% of what we start in the quarter doesn't end up happening from a roadmap perspective because of new stuff that comes through, right? Or modification. So I think as I roadmap, I'm very clear on like sort of the priorities, right? The P0s, P1s, P2s. And I expect that a series of these will change through the course of the quarterly road mapping process. I think what's important though is as you're getting, these like sort of requests, at the onset, I always, just have that listening ear, be sort of customer centric, understand what they're trying to solve, and then, sort of stack rank it against everything else that we're trying to do and provide that visibility. And depending on the person asking, right, and if they have sort of like the decision making power, providing that sort of like visibility into, hey, if we do X, Y needs to get slowed down or not done at all. Is that okay? And there are certain things I'll be very passionate about not moving. But then there's other things where I'm like, I'm okay if we want to make this trade-off, but let's be clear that this is a higher priority item. And often that's an eye-opening moment for them because we are thinking, big picture, a running list of like 10 projects, but our stakeholders are not. They don't know what we're working on always. And so for them, the thing that they want is the most urgent. And sometimes they've forgotten that we're also working on these 3 other things for them. And so I think bringing that visibility to them and then having that conversation is actually a great way to then think through like, hey, it's the smartest decision for us to make this trade-off and work on this like new thing? Or actually, should we like prioritize? And typically when I have that conversation, we'll end up having an answer. Sometimes it's swap. Sometimes it's, oh crap, let's not touch this other thing. We need that to get done. And, it ends up being a pretty amicable conversation.
Yeah, I might a little bit to what you just said too. Sorry, Will. And, absolutely listen to what they have to say and then see how these projects that you have prioritized, how they tie to the company goals. Targets was probably top of the goal, and the company more likely will have maybe 4 or 5 other goals for the year, right? And everything else Shreya just said, +1.
I love it. And there's a reason that I join every sales training course offered. I use the discovery process in those situations. There's a problem. I'm curious. I'm leaning in, and I'm really, through that discovery process, educating them. They have a problem. We have problems. How do they weigh against each other? And it's really an educational experience for both parties. And I think it makes it a lot easier when you take that approach, because it's not that you're not interested in helping or your roadmap is more important. It's that you're curious and you want to always make sure that you're prioritizing the most important things. And it requires understanding what this actual issue is that they're coming to you with. So asking questions, Ping, I love it.
I think the other thing, Will, that I've used in the past is an intake form. And typically that is a nice way of adding friction, right? And it forces the person on the other side to really decide like, hey, is this something I need right now? And if so, why, et cetera. And that's been actually a good tactic for, I would say, mid-management down and the requests that come from them. I think senior leaders, I'll usually have like that, one-to-one conversation with. But for our mid-managers, as like a new idea pops up in their head, giving them a way to sort of like dynamically, share the things that they want, but adding a bit of friction to the process so that they can be thoughtful about like, okay, do I really want this? Do I really want to fill out this form? And you'll be surprised at how often people will be like, I can wait on this. Like, I don't need it right away.
I love it, Shreya. And one of the things that I do when I come in is I set up that form. And I use Salesforce cases. I've been lucky that it hasn't been overutilized in different ways, but I use it internally for my case system. And then it becomes actually a tool for my ICs to start kind of also learning the strategic aspect of, well, you have these 10 requests. Let's start looking for themes. And how would you prioritize this queue of questions? And so that's one of the ways that I think about managing those expectations, but also using it as a tool to teach my team how to become more strategic. And Ping, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how you think about really the manager's role to really elevate those ICs.
Yeah, I see the manager's role as absolutely bringing out the best in the IC for sure. What I would ask in return also is some commitment from their end as well, right? Maybe start with a smaller one where, hey, if you get these questions, how would you handle it? Don't answer the questions for them. See if they may go out and do some research on their own, come back with more feedback. And I hate to say it, but experience does help. The more work experience you have, the more situations you've seen. So I think you could potentially, think quicker on your feet. You have previous experiences that you can tie into. All of that is super helpful. I know part of the question is also, hey, what about the ad hoc requests of reports and firefighting and tool admins? I hate to say it, that's not going to go away. It will always be there. I think probably everyone's job, a part of it will be admin, but no matter what role you're in, RevOps or not. But yeah, the IC will have to be equally committed. Like I'm committed as a manager to always bring out the best in you, to always elevate you, and you show me that you can do the same.
Yeah.
I think something that I learned in my early days in consulting was this notion of answer first. Any Bainies out there are probably familiar with this, but it's this notion of like, hey, you come to me with like an initial sort of like recommendation or your thoughts, and I set that expectation, right? When someone new joins or that I'm going to manage in our early one-to-one, we spend a lot of time kind of laying out what our work dynamic is going to be like, and a little bit of a cheat sheet at the onset. Of course, you will organically learn how to work with one another. But I share sort of like the idea of an answer first, and hey, you might be wrong, but that's okay. Like I want you to first come to me with like what your intuition or your gut or your process is, and we can riff off of that. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is it enables the person, the individual, to force themselves to think more strategically, right? And two is at some point as a leader, we're so far removed from what's happening on the ground that I trust that my ICs are the subject matter experts in sort of like the areas that they're focusing on. And so I expect that they'll probably come up with smarter answers than I would, given the amount of time and focus they have on that particular topic, right? And so in a lot of ways, it's easier for me to, as a leader, react to things that they've initially proposed as opposed to starting from scratch. And so I found that to be a useful sort of like way in which you create an environment where your ICs can start moving from tactical to strategic as well.
Yeah, and I agree with Shreya because I also come from the consulting background, and one of the things that you're thought about is, and in fact, even this goes back even to the interview process, right? When you're interviewing ICs, one of the things that I'm very specific about is a way to evaluate how they deal with ambiguity, right? When things are just open-ended, how do you put a structure to it? How do you put a thought process to it? Really is where it all starts for you to move from tactical to strategic. So, great point, Shreya.
I love that because one of the things that I stress and I share candidly is there's not really a right answer. You're trying to mitigate risk. You're trying to pick the best option with the best available information and giving them that opportunity every time when they talk to you about their ideas is another opportunity to build that strategic muscle, skill set. Really, it's something that needs to be practiced. So I love that. And one of the things that RevOps is commonly tweaking and always working on, and I'm trying to drive more strategic implications into revenue compensation plans, is how do you take business strategy, build that into a compensation plan to get the behaviors that you're looking to really reinforce. I think I only have examples of where I screwed it up. So I'm going to probably pause here and then open it up for anyone to chime in with how you solve some of those challenges.
I think keep it simple. It's really important to keep it simple. And oftentimes we potentially try to overcomplicate it because you want to meet those specific objectives, the company objectives. compensation plan should be tied to company objectives, right, for the most part. Then you think of land logos, expansion, renewals, whatever, right? How do you make it so that people don't really, they should make the most of it. Sales reps should understand it easily and see how they can make the most money out of the compensation plan, but keep it simple.
Yeah, and I think probably absolutely agree with Ping. Sometimes companies tend to overcomplicate it. It's like a kind of ops thinking like a police, trying to see what are the areas that possibly could be gamed, and then trying to put rules around it. And then by the time you realize you have like 10 different rules that you don't know why it started off with, right? So I think keeping it simple is one, super important. Second, one thing that I've also realized with a lot of sales teams, in order for you to align to the company goals, generally sales teams don't tend to be as comfortable with data as much as obviously ops teams are. And so, providing an ability for them to visualize how all of this ties back to their own, performance and their incentives is super important, because yeah, you have the company goals, you set a commission plan that's aligned with the company goals, but then at the end of the day, if the reps don't see what you see, they're not going to do what you're going to do. And also, this doesn't mean doing this post after they close the deal, but even before they close, helping them visualize, what if I do this action? What if I push this deal from a single year contract to a multi-year contract? Can I get that accelerator? Helping them visualize this means that you not only set the commission plan aligned to your company goals, but also have the behavior tied back to the commission plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe the last thing I'd add is balance like risk and reward, right? And that's maybe inherently part of compensation planning. But as you think about tying your comp plans to your company goals, there's the notion of sort of like the roll up and over assign and all of that fun stuff. But as an example, if your company strategy is you're going to be focusing on a certain segment of customers, and you're trying to be more entrepreneurial in a certain segment, right? This was our case last year, where for our enterprise team, we were just kind of lifting that team off the ground, and it wasn't a core focus at the company level, yet one that we wanted to start venturing into. And so as we were kind of building out that team, knowing that, the resources and investment in that team were going to be different, we wanted to set that team up for success and balance their risk and reward accordingly, right? So doing a dual plan of like revenue and logos or something like that, or changing their accelerator curve, or changing how we think about guarantees for that team, knowing that it's going to be a bit more of an entrepreneurial segment that we're going to go after. Make sure sort of you look at nuances along those lines as well, while at the aggregate, of course, rolling up to your overall company goals.
If the reps don't understand it, then they won't understand what behavior they're supposed to do. So we could dive in much deeper, but we are running out of time. So we're going to sum things up with everyone's key tweet length, key takeaways. What do you want everybody to walk away today's conversation with? And I'll start with you, Ping.
Sure. I would say a successful RevOps or go-to-market ops is just ultimately a strategic role, right? It's always allocate time to work on those strategic projects so that you don't get stuck on only tactical work. Is that tweet length too long?
It's beautiful, Ping. Thank you. Siva.
So I think from my experience, well-built RevOps teams are the true hack for companies to drive growth and also efficiency in the GTM funnel. Several fast-growing companies have really adopted RevOps, GTM ops, sales ops, sales strategy and ops, all of these different names, but essentially the function that's what we've discussed in the last 1 hour. So if you've not already started, build the case in your company and push for more strategic growth with the ops teams.
Awesome. Thank you. Priya.
All right. I used to work at Twitter. I'm sure this is going to be more than 140 characters, but my tweet would be, it takes both strategy and tactics to build and develop a high-performing go-to-market org. But the strategic is really important for long-term growth and sustainability. So make sure you have your seat at the table to own or be involved in some of the key initiatives and decisions for your business.
Beautiful. Accept the tactical, but prioritize the strategic. And I hope that each and every one of you, while Janessa comes and joins us back on stage, have enjoyed this conversation with these amazing leaders. I'm so privileged and so thankful that I could be on the front row seat of this great panel. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much, Will and Siva, Shreya, and Ping for a phenomenal panel. I'm really excited that we got to close out day one with something so action-based and also just fundamentally amazing. So thank you all so much for joining and from hearing from our fantastic panelists. But don't go away, because tomorrow, bright and early, is the next day of our 3-day Sales Reimagined Summit. So we hope to see you in the morning for our next panel titled The Data-Driven Sales Leader, How Modern Sales Leaders Weave Data Throughout Their Sales Management motion. That's 9 a.m. Pacific, bright and early, with Pete Kazanji, the co-founder and CRO of Atrium. So with that, we're going to close out today's magic show by doing our final trick of the night, which is heading backstage and chit-chatting, me and the panelists. But thank you all so much for joining. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, and we hope to see you tomorrow for day 2. Take care, folks.